Hi, I'm Travis B. Hill. I'm the creator and writer of Thorn, as well as some other comics, which we'll be talking about today. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Travis B. Hill 5. And you can also find me on the internet. You can see my portfolio at travisbhillcomics.com. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by a very talented writer. He is a comic writer, but he is also a PhD student, probably has his PhD by now, so I have to call him Dr. Travis B. Hill. But we're joined by the ever-talented Travis B. Hill, creator of Thorn and a bunch of other comics that I'll let him talk about during the interview. How are you doing today?
I am well, Kurt. Thank you for having me on. Blast to be here. Not a PhD yet, so I'm not doctor. I finished my exams this fall, and then I'll write my dissertation. But close. But I always joke and say the only people I'm going to make call me doctor are my two brothers. Everyone else can keep calling me Travis. So that's it.
Once you become a doc in your respective major there, and we'll talk about that as well too, you'll be probably my third or fourth doctor I've had on the show. So that works out.
There we go. I'll come back at that time. We'll talk more.
Which means I'll have to have a doctor panel on comics and their creations as well too. So Danny Gorney, yourself, and Doc Carlo S. San Juan from the Philippines will have to come on and do a roundtable session. That'd be good.
No, that'd be great. I mean, there's, comic studies conferences, comic and pop culture conferences. Those are big. I'm going on a panel for the Spider-Man and Pop Culture Conference at Bowling Green State University in September. Our panel is, I have a theology degree from Dallas Seminary, master's in theology. So our panel is religion and Spider-Man. And so there are four of us. We'll be presenting short papers, and then we'll have like a kind of Q&A. So yeah, I mean, come on, let's do it. Let's have a roundtable.
For those, and I always jump ahead because, you're just such an interesting person. So, but for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking.
My name is Travis B. Hill, and I know that we're going to be talking about Thorn today a little bit. That is a new comic that I have with Advent Comics that's coming out. Issue 1's coming out July 11th. They're July 5th. Sorry. Issue 1's coming out in shops July 5th. Pre-orders are closed now, so you might want to just check with your local shops to see if you can get it. It's the first of a 12-issue series from Advent. It's I know we'll talk more about it, so I won't give away too many details. Other than that, as far as comics goes, I am the lead scriptwriter and associate project manager with Sequential Potential Comics, or SP Comics, where we collaborate with academics, nonprofits, scholars, researchers to turn their scholarship into comics. And so we sometimes create like a one shot, like a 20-page issue. We're working on a couple of graphic novels. We make one-page abstracts. We create these comic abstracts for professors' articles when they want to try to get more people to read it, and they can put the abstract out on social media. And a comic is really inviting as opposed to maybe a normal, 2-paragraph abstract, something like that. And then, something, I just finished up a script yesterday. We've done a couple of these like short 4 to 8 page comic prologues that introduce the research ideas in the book. And so those will have been at the front of research books, the first 4 to 8 pages. Somebody can pick it up off the shelves at Barnes & Noble, open it up and say, oh, here's a comic, read it, and be like, oh, is this what this book is about? And kind of get introduced to all the ideas and themes that they're about, that they could read if they pick up that book. So very interesting work, a lot of fun. That's what I do all day. So these kind of academic comics, merging my studies with my love of comic writing and scripting. And then I've got a couple of other anthology projects and other series in the works. So some people know me from Techno Nights with Dauntless Stories, with Marcus Jimenez on the art over there. we book one came out a couple months ago, and has received a lot of solid reception. I'm enjoying the feedback, and I'm editing book two right now, and book goes into art production in the fall. So there we go.
So a little bit on your plate.
Little bit, yeah. I at the end of every week I take inventory on like what I've worked on, because as the project manager I'm like juggling a lot of, like, right now we have 9 or 10 projects going over at Sequential Potential, and so I'm the back and forth between our clients, the researchers, and the artists or creators, and sometimes I'm writing the script but sometimes not. And so this week we tried to close 3 projects, so I'm talking with 3 different artists and our creative director and be like, hey, we got to get these files packaged, so all that kind of stuff. So I was working on about 7 or 8 projects over there, and then I had my own 4 or 5. Like, I had to send off an anthology pitch this week, and in the midst of all of that. And so but I love it. I keep feeling how blessed I am to just get to do this, wake up and write comics and talk to artists. That's what I do all day. And so it used to be a hobby where I was kind of working in the nonprofit sector up until this past January, and it was a hobby for 6 years, and it was great. And I got some stories picked up, and stories like Thorn got under contract, and now I just get to kind of spend my time focusing on comics in a way that it's hard. I was talking to my creative director yesterday. It's hard to draw the line, because I used to go to work and come home and work on comics, or spend my weekend working on comics. But now it's like my job. So you got to get up. And so when do you kind of draw the line?
Yeah.
Instead of saying like, oh, I'm going to work from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., I'm trying to find a good like work-life balance where I'm not spending 14 hours a day, 6 days a week writing these stories, even though it's fun. I got to do some other things sometimes, but and they give me some space to work on my papers for school and stuff.
It's good that you've turned a hobby into a career, and it's great to see that you're doing very well with it as well too, and you're helping others realize their dreams too. We have to talk about Thorn. Give us the elevator pitch of Thorn.
Sure. The log line is, the way I've been describing it to people is, it's Batman, but Commissioner Gordon is this main villain, right? So it's been interesting to talk about that, because some people are like, oh, so it's like a crooked detective. I'm like, no, it's like a crooked entire justice system, but it's pulled from very real scenarios that we see all the time, with just the way police kind of interact in an unjust way, criminal justice system interacts in an unjust way, but even down to the city planning and how that can act unjustly to people who live in a city, So it's looking at all of that. It's taking those themes and trying to explore what type of hero arises when that person, Thorn in this case, the vigilante, looks at all of that system and realizes across the board how crooked it is, and he's trying to just protect his neighborhood from that crookedness. That's kind of what it is.
What is the most misunderstood aspect about this genre that people who don't follow it misunderstand?
The vigilante genre is about justice in particular ways, but it's with a kind of a main character who has an obsession and feels like at some point they were denied justice or protection from something, right? And so they have to provide that type of protection. That's what I think is kind of, so from there you can explore a lot of different themes about justice and oppression and liberation and those types of things from the genre, depending on the vantage point of the vigilante character, right? So we see Batman. He thinks he's been slighted in life because his parents were murdered, and so now he's got to, hey, I've got to clean this up from Gotham. I mean, we got crazy stories now. It's kind of gone away from that, but like that's what Batman's mission is, right? Like, I have to protect people in Gotham so that they don't have to go through what I went through, because the justice system wasn't enough to protect me from whatever this harm is, right? Spider-Man, it's his guilt, like his guilt over not doing enough early on to preserve justice from a criminal. And so now he has to do everything he can to kind of absolve this guilt but also not let other people die like his uncle Ben died, that kind of thing. So that's what I think the genre is. But there's kind of like an obsession. Even Rorschach in Watchmen has this obsession to the truth, right? And he has this kind of twisted upbringing, right, where he was kind of abused, and so now he is kind of a violent abuser a little bit, but he's got this bent towards the truth, that he feels like he was denied.
How has your degree informed yourself as a comic writer?
People people are going to watch these and be like, I'm tired of hearing this guy tell this story, but I have developed my comic writing in step with my academic scholarship. So when I was at Dallas Seminary, if you go to my website, you can see the first chapter of a graphic novel that I'm working on called Mustard Seed. It's completely done. The first chapter is completely done. You can read it. And so that is based on the the graphic novel itself, Mustard Seed, is based on my last 2 years living in Shreveport. My roommate and I, my best friend, we were working with a bunch of teenagers in the neighborhood that we lived in, Sunset Acres, and one of the guys got kicked out by his dad and said he can't come back. And so he came to live with us. And so it's about kind of that experience of, learning to do life together in this very kind of found family type way, and learning from each other, and kind of starting to realize things for the first time, and just being introduced to different types of struggles in the world. And so that's what it's about. I left Shreveport to come to Dallas to start working in nonprofit and to go to Dallas Seminary. And so at that time, I was far enough removed from Shreveport in that time of my life. I started to kind of reflect, like, okay, thinking about themes and the way I think about that theologically and philosophically, and just like the experience we had and what it meant. And so I thought, and of course, I'm a huge comic reader from like age 5, 3, I don't know. And so I was about 30 years old at the time, and I said, man, this might be a comic book. Like, I could write this as a comic. Like, I could envision retelling this narrative, like kind of this time in my life as a comic. I might have an idea here. And so I had taken a couple of classes in the arts department. I went to the head of the arts department at the seminary and said, I signed up for a like little weekend comic book writing class in New York with the associate editor of Spider-Man at the time, Tom Brennan. And so I was like, hey, I'm just going to go take this comic writing class so I can kind of learn the form and kind of just get the basics. I just need the basics because I know how to write. I just need to know how to write in this style. Just give me the basics, which was great. I went up there, but I told my professor at seminary, I said, hey, I'm going to go take this writing class, and I think I have a comic idea, and I've signed up for your collaborative art and theology class, where the course was about creating art with kind of taking the theological themes that you're thinking in your head, and kind of how does that communicate through your art. So I was like, hey, I'm going to take that class and kind of flesh out some of these ideas. And he was like, oh, well, you need to get with Mark Pate. This guy, Mark Pate, he's a comic book artist on campus. And so doing the same kind of degree, we were both doing master's theology or whatever. And so I met with Mark, who is the artist of Thorn and Mustard Seed. So here we are, 7 years later on this journey. And we found out we lived in apartments across the street from each other, like literally, like his front door is across the street from my front door. So we started hanging out once a week on Mondays, all Monday afternoon. He was working on his own project. I was working on mine. And he kind of just helped me sign up for some other classes like character development, plot development. So I was taking all these classes in the art department while I was focused on systematic theology. Like that's what I was writing my thesis in over there. But at the same time, I was developing Mustard Seed. And so that's kind of how my learning has informed this, right? And then I get to my PhD program in 2019. This is when I started in the fall, and started my PhDs are in. I have 3 fields: comic book studies, American religious history and the long civil rights movement, or U.S. civil rights history, if you will. And so I started thinking on those things. And I wrote a paper. There was a conference that I went to, and it was called Origins, and it was about origin stories. So papers thinking through origin stories and the origins of things. And I was thinking about the origin of Batman, Superman, well, mainly Batman and Spider-Man, right? And I wrote a paper called Black Vigilantism in an Anti-Black World. And what would that look like? Like, what, Batman, okay, but Bruce Wayne, you're rich and white. So the system is going to work out for you. Like, you are on this mission, but the system is built to help you. That's what it is. But what happens when you have a system that, like in America and in most of the world, but obviously this is my cultural context I've grown up in, that is an anti-Black culture. I mean, in terms of the legal system, and it has been, because I'm studying this history and all that. And so I present this idea, thinking about Thorn, and then wrote a short story about it. And then I went ahead and took 2 script writing classes, and developed the first 4 scripts of Thorn 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that time. And so that's how, like, all of these themes that I'm thinking about, my way to, instead of always, I mean, I'm writing, papers. I'm this conference at Bowling Green in September. Like, I've written that's a chapter that I've written for a book called Religion and Spider-Man that I'm presenting. I have a chapter in a book called Spider-Man and Theology that came out in 2021. So I'm writing these papers that I think, my learning kind of where it kind of crosses with comics, and I have other books I've written, but one way to explore what I'm learning has become like, what would it look like in a comic narrative,
Yeah.
Because you can write papers all day, but sometimes ain't nobody reading those. Nobody's reading those, but somebody will read a story, so.
That's just like, if you post a video on YouTube, either you're going to get 1,000 views or you're going to get one person that's yourself. So,
Yeah, sure. That's it. But also me telling you what, Spider-Verse is about, right? Just because that's the most recent movie I've seen, versus you going to watch Across the Spider-Verse. Me telling you what the themes and the meaning of Spider-Verse is about, versus you going to watch it. More people are going to go watch it than hear me talk about what I think the philosophy is about.
Was it a good film? Because I haven't seen it yet. So
it's very good. It's high packed. Here's what I have been saying. No spoilers, because they've already said it's part 1 of a 2-part thing. But more so than almost any movie I've ever watched, it just doesn't end. Like, it stops in the middle of a story is basically what happens. And so for me, people are like, "Oh, it's an incredible film," and I'm like, "Well, it's an episode of a 2-part series, but it's not really a film." And it's excellent. I mean, from musical score to the animation, everything about it is excellent. The story so far is excellent. Like, it's excellent. So, but then just this morning, someone pointed out, well, one character from start to finish has a narrative arc that resolves. And I mean, they told me I'm not going to give that character away. And I said, "Oh, you're right. You're right. So much is going on that I forgot that happened." So if that's the case, like, if we're just looking at it through that character's lens, then it's a very good film for that character. It is. So, but definitely worth the watch. I'm going to go see it again next week with my wife, but after that, I probably won't watch it again until next March, right before the next movie comes out, like the day of, like whatever that Thursday is. I'll take an afternoon, watch the first one, and then go watch the second one. Nice. Just because the cliffhanger is so frustrating. It's like, why do I want to watch this if I don't know what's going? Like, I want to see the thing get to an ending. But it's good. It's very good. A lot of fun to watch. But I think Into the Spider-Verse was is one of the best comic book films ever, top two in my opinion. And I could rewatch that all day. It's so good.
What was an early experience where you learned that language had power? And I'm going to add a secondary question to it. And how has that helped you as a comic writer?
Gosh, I don't know. That's a powerful question. That's deeper. Um, I don't know of a first experience. I just think of my time as a mainly when I think of language being a powerful tool. I think of great orators, right? People who can really speak and give these inspiring speeches, which I am not. And but also, I've always been impressed with the power of people who can be soft spoken when making a presentation, giving a sermon, giving a speech, where they're really soft spoken, but they have everybody hanging on every word because they can just communicate in a great way. And so I think about language as what it's meant to be, right? A mode of communication. Um, what I think is best about the power of language is people who know how to. I'm just not one for a bunch of big fancy words, and if you can communicate to a wider audience who, if you're not trying to make your language super selective and kind of high academic, which will exclude people. But if you're trying to communicate in ways, and I think that's kind of what makes sequential potential fun, is because we are taking this very dense academic research, and people in the academic field don't use language to exclude people. I think they use it to get very kind of intricate points across, and so they have to use very specific language, which is great. But then they're making this effort by using comics to invite different types of readers and different types of people into it. So I think the power of language is your ability to invite people into the way you think about the world, and just to communicate with people about the way you understand things. And so I feel like my understanding of language has developed, and the power of it has developed over time. I can't point to an exact point. When you ask me that, I start thinking about the first time I had to give a 5-minute speech in my intro to communication course in college, my freshman year, and I was like, and it could be on anything, and I was like, I don't want to talk in front of anyone ever. And then, I taught high school math for 4 years, and then I was a basketball coach. And so it's like I talk in front of people all the time now. Like I make presentations at conferences. And so it's, you make this journey, but you make this journey with language and knowing what is meaningful to say and not, and sometimes getting it wrong. And yeah, my wife and I go to this comedy club on Thursday nights as often as we can. And we see, local comics doing their thing, cutting their teeth a little bit. It's the free show on Thursday so we like that. But they're good. And sometimes they're really bad, but they're up there and they're getting better. And it's fun to watch people develop their confidence and that kind of thing with language and with knowing what to say and learning what not to say. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's a long answer, and it probably has not a whole lot of bearing on what you asked, but and I think that helps me with comics as well. You kind of think about, how you can communicate to other people in the dialogue. Comics has this three tier, in my opinion, I don't know, this isn't like in a book or anything, but has this 3-tier method of delivering information, right? Captions through the narrator, dialogue through the characters, and then the visuals through the artist who's providing. So you can layer a story 3 different ways, and you can give meaning to it a lot. Visually, you can do visual kind of like straightforward or metaphor. Your narration can be about something completely different, themes and ideas and philosophy, but your dialogue can be, whatever. So I think the cool thing about comics is you don't have to use all the language that you think you have to use textually, because you have these different modes of communication. So you can you can trust your readers a lot more. You have to. I mean, Scott McCloud talks about the gutters and having to. The reader has to participate, right? Same with Nick Susanis in Unflattening. Talks about the participation of the reader, and how that enhances the communication. So, I think the language in comics has to be constructed in such a way that allows the reader to participate with not just what's being said, but what's being shown and what's not being shown. And so, yeah, so a lot of, I think, all of that to say that what's informed me is my selection of language and what to say and not say.
Everyone usually asks on these types of interviews, what's the wisest piece of advice or what's the most BS piece of advice you've ever received? But what is the second wisest piece of advice that you've received that has stuck with you in your career?
What the thing for me is write it. Like the biggest, people get stuck, and I've gotten stuck before. Like, I don't know what this is gonna. Just write the thing, get it out on paper, and then figure out the rest. So that's been a good piece of advice that I've carried with me. Just whatever it is, get it out. Don't just sit here and be like, oh, I've got this idea, but I can't figure it out. And just write it out, get it out. And then you can start to develop and add and massage or whatever. And that's me with the script stage. I'm like, golly, I don't know. And I'm always like super nervous when this is an experience, right? With that I'm thankful for, that kind of tells me I'm doing okay for now. I don't know. Maybe down the road I might be bad at this, but for now I'm doing okay. I always get nervous because I send off my scripts to clients who have contracted us and are paying us out of their, hard-earned research money to make these comics. And we've gone through conversations. Usually we have a couple meetings, and then I get their material and I read it. And then I'm like, okay, here's my idea. And they're like, all right, I like that idea. Let's see where it goes. And then I give them the script, and I'm always like, they just, they're paying for this. This could be really bad. Like, I could have written a really bad thing. And I don't have much anxiety in life, but it's that, like, while I'm writing a script for a client specifically like that, I just get like super, like, it takes me a lot longer, but then I have to remind myself, just write the thing, and then we can figure how to change it later. And so, but this week I had a really good experience. I was a week behind on a deadline, which I hate being behind on deadlines at all, like ever. Like, my big thing for a long time was I've never missed a deadline. I've missed a few now, but now that I have, 15 deadlines a month, I miss a few, and that's it's not okay, but it happens. And so I was a week behind, and I was like, just trying to get this thing written. And I was doing damage control on some projects last week just because, we had some deadlines and I had to make sure the artists were meeting them, and the art and the files, not damage control, but just like, it was a high intensity week. Yeah. And so I didn't get the chance to spend as much time on the script as I wanted. And so I spent the holiday weekend kind of getting it all worked out. I sent it off, and I was like, man, I hope this isn't bad. Like, it's just, I like it, but I hope it's not bad to them, because you never know. And then a couple hours later, I got an email back from the client and was like, hey, this is great. Love it. But I got a couple of edits. And so I was like, oh, yes. So my thing is, but it always starts with that advice, like, write the thing, just get it written, and then figure everything out. And a lot of time, more often than not, like, people will like it. And if it's bad, this is my second thing. Have a good editor. Don't ever, I've heard people say, I'm like, oh, who's the editor on your comic? People doing indie comics, and people doing indie comics and Kickstarters, which I love. I love supporting Kickstarters, but I'm all, sometimes I'll be like, hey, okay, you've Kickstarted like 5 issues of this thing. Like who's the editor and the writer? A lot of times the writer will be like, oh, well, I'm an editor, so I edit myself. And I'm like, no way. I've never I've had an editor on almost every story I've done at some level, and they've always made the comic better. Whether it's a four, there I've got this story coming out in Limit Break. Limit Break, they've got their new anthology called Fractured Realms, and it's about like horror, like Norse mythology, but you take you take an old Norse myth and you turn it into a horror story, right?
Nice.
Yeah, and so it's just a 4-page story, and I sent it off, and the editor, uh, Paul and Gary Mahoney, Paul Carroll, and Gary Mahoney were over there at Limit Break, and they sent me notes back, and I was like, oh, they're like, hey, like you're characterizing this character one way, but if you stick to this kind of characterization, it'd probably enhance the story. And then you can do this. So think about that. And I was like, oh, that's way better. Like, that's way better. And so I kind of, couple quick edits and boom, better story. Right. So, same thing with Techno Knights, right? Brent Fisher, they are fantastic.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Just a fantastic just at everything. They're great at everything, right? Anthology curator, I mean, and storyteller and writer. I mean, just great, and great at editing. So they made one suggestion. They had some small suggestions, but there's one big suggestion to Techno Knights to hey, you need, again, kind of like what's going on with my complaint about the Across the Spider-Verse, right? I had written a story that just kind of ends, and it didn't have like a narrative arc, no resolve. And Brent was like, you need to have something at the end that kind of, this is a series, but every single installment of this 3-book series needs to be its own story. Mm-hmm. And so think about doing something like this. And that's, if you read Techno Knights, the big spaceship crashing to Earth, space station crashing to Earth scene, that wasn't even in the original draft. And then Brent was like, you should add something at the end. And I was like, what about this? And they were like, yeah. I was like, all right, cool. So that's my thing. So write the thing, get an editor to read the thing and help you out, whether it's just a friend that can help you out, that does stories as well. And then the last thing, you asked for first and you asked for second. I gave you first. But third is cut dialogue. After you write it the first time, cut it while the art's being, cut it. Yeah, and then you'll have something. So that thing that one thing that you want that character to say, where he or she or they wax poetic across a page for 650 words, cut that. I've written it in every book, and then it's like, no, cut that.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who is that for you?
Man, I think in terms of like comic book writing, I think of two comics that, well, one that I really appreciated before I would ever even thought to be a comic writer, and that was Pride of Baghdad by Brian K. Vaughan, and just the way it ends, and it's kind of an Animal Farm situation where you've got these animals, and that kind of the Baghdad Zoo during the bombing of Iraq, and so he's telling this kind of political conflict and kind of societal conflict through these animals, again, kind of like Animal Farm. And so I thought that was very clever. and I thought, man, you can tell a very good story in a sleight of hand way, and that's in comics. That made me realize that. And but you can also kind of make it emotional because at the end, um, now I'm losing my memory. I don't know. The lions die, right? If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry. Or if you haven't read it, I'm sorry. And so then, but those lions were shot and killed by U.S. soldiers in real life. So Vaughn took this real life news story and infused it with this meaning of these anthropomorphic characters to to um, to kind of say what he wanted to say about the the U.S.'s war in Iraq, right? And so I just thought, man, that would, and in the end, he says, and a lot of other people died too, and just thought, dang, like that's pretty heavy. Just one line like that in a couple words. So I thought that was pretty inspiring, and just like, oh, if I ever wrote a comic one day, maybe it could be this good. I don't know. That's kind of how you think when you do these things. But I think more personally, for me, um, Robert Wilson, he's the artist on Heartthrob, and he did an issue of Barbaric. Fantastic artist. He was willing to mentor me for a year. So to graduate from my theology program, I ended up needing to do an apprenticeship in the arts department because I couldn't qualify for a internship the way I needed to in time to start my PhD program. It was kind of a mess. But because of that, I had to move over to the arts department and do an apprenticeship in an artistic field of my choice. So comic book, or like an art medium of my choice. So I was like, oh, comic books is going to be the art medium. And so part of that was you had to go find a mentor in that medium to mentor you for a year, a school year. So Robert was living in Dallas at the time. He lives in Oklahoma City now, and he had always been super helpful. Answering my questions. He had met up with me and Mark once to kind of give us some advice on the pages of Mustard Seed and just talk about comics and the industry and all that kind of stuff. And so I reached out to him, and he agreed to mentor me for a year and gave me just tons of advice, and not just comic advice, but comic business advice. And he's just very heady about how to approach the industry. And I was just really inspired by that. One, by his kindness and generosity, him introducing to me. There was never a moment where he made me feel like an underling, always made me feel like a friend. I mean, there were people that I kind of starstruck around. Maybe starstruck's a bad word because I don't really get that way, but people who I was like, oh, this is the person that wrote this, right? And this is the person that wrote this. And he was like, oh yeah, I know them. Like, they're my friends. And so he would introduce me as like, oh, this is my friend Travis. Not at once did he say, oh, this is a guy that's helping me out, or a guy that I'm kind of showing. Or not, he's just always, this is my friend. So just the kindness he showed me, and just the way he navigates in the industry with what I think is integrity and kindness, that was real inspiring. And so kind of showed me like, hey, approach comics in a particular way, because we hear all these stories about fucking assholes in comics, and abusive men, and just all of that. And I kind of hadn't really got into comics much at that point, but the stuff I knew was like, oh, there's a lot of cishet white male assholes in comics. Like, I would look like a normal comic piece of shit coming in. And so I was just like, that's kind of a toxic environment. But Robert in a different way showed me like, there are like the community is very kind in this way if you think about it in a particular way. Now, if you are, don't be one of those people and don't associate with one of those people. And so anyways, that's getting off on a different point, but Robert has been very inspirational to me, and we're friends now, and we talk semi regularly, and but yeah, he was pretty inspirational for me as I was getting into doing comics, and kind of just taught me about, like I said, the industry itself, getting my start, the business of the industry, and then just kind of how to navigate it with humility and kind of friendship and those types of things. So it was good.
From a professional standpoint, you have a master's degree and soon to be a PhD in an amazing field. You've created comics as well too, so you're successful in that regard on many fronts. So professionally, you're successful. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Professionally, yes, I'm successful in ways that I've been published. I'm in shops, like that kind of thing, and that's great. But it doesn't translate into anybody in comics, whether it's Kickstarter or on the stands, knows that it's hard to translate it into a big like monetary thing. That's why I'm thankful for my spot over at Sequential Potential. Because I'm able to do this. But man, I tell everybody every day, like, my wife's amazing. And ever since I've been married to her, every day feels like a vacation. Like, just, it's great. Like, her and I talked about it one time because she, her and a couple of other our friends, like kind of got married in the same time, and they were having problems early on in their marriage that we kind of weren't having, and she was like real worried about it, and she was like, should we be having these types of problems? And I was like, I hope not. Like, I'm not trying to have those problems. And I just and I said, look, I don't, every day us being married, I say it all the time, like, this feels like a vacation. We're almost at 6 years, 6 year vacation. That's what it is. There's got its ups and downs, but and so that, I've got good friends, that good community, good life. I'm probably declining in health now that I'm not out of my athlete phase, so maybe not that. But we can. I feel like I'm successful in that, like, personally, just in my relationships and in my friendships, and so that. Yeah, that's an interesting question, but yeah, I think so. Like, I think my personal success very much outweighs and outlasts and overextends beyond any of my professional success in comics or academics, for sure. So, yeah, that's, again, you're asking these questions, so I'm sure I have more answers and about the ways I think I'm impacting the world beyond what I'm creating, but. I don't know. I just think, like, I think I'm personally successful. Yeah, I like where I'm at.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
I'm gonna give you the Giannis Antetokounmpo answer. Um, there is no failure. It's all steps to success. Um, Earlier this year, when the Bucks lost in the playoffs, like right after they lost, in the post-game presser, one of the Bucks media beat writers, I mean, the Bucks ended up number one in the East. They were, kind of favorites to go to the finals, and they lost to the 8th seed in the first round. And so this beat writer asked them, do you, with all these expectations and finishing the first seed, and you've lost the 8th seed, when you had like finals aspirations, do you consider this season a failure? And Giannis is super emotional, right? He's just lost after this kind of grueling NBA season, and with these expectations on his shoulders, and he was perturbed. It was like, why would you ask me that? And then he said, there is no failure in sports. There's only steps to success. So I guess that's it. That's my answer. There is no failure in what I do. It's only steps to success. And so there you go.
I like it. Yeah, that was a great response to it. I mean, he could have told the guy to fuck off and just walk off.
He could have. Yeah, very much.
But he gave probably the best response to that type of question. And I've watched that a few times. It's like, yeah, it's we also, and just to kind of segue off of that real quick, is we don't look back on what we do and look at the victories we've had. We only see a project complete, but we don't understand or recognize our path to the successes that we've accomplished.
And my thing is, like, I mean, setting aside the humor and using Giannis's answer, but I mean, in the end, we can say, like, if you didn't achieve a certain goal, then the way to handle that, and we call that failure. Because honestly, like, yeah, Giannis, you failed. You wanted to win a title and you failed at it. Like, you did not succeed. Now, if you go get one next year and you say, oh, well, then what? If you point back to this moment and say, this is what helped me get there, then you learned from it and you figured out how to be better the next time. And I think that's what it is. Like, if you want to say, oh, I didn't achieve my goal, so I failed, the way you handle that, if you want to continue to achieve that goal, then you have to learn from it and figure out how to be better next time. I mean, I was just reading I think it's Detective Comics 1072, the one Ram V is writing, the most recent one that came out this week. I was reading it last night, and they were, talking about something that makes Batman great. I think it was the villain who was beating him. I don't know if that matters. It was the narration. Yeah. But the thing about Batman is not that he wins right away every time. It's that he knows how to learn from defeat and then he's able to beat the enemy. That's what he's able to do. Like, the way he can strategize is he's got to take a couple lumps and then figure out, okay, this is how I beat you. This is how I strategize against you. And so they showed, like, he was fighting these two characters that had kind of, worked him over a couple of issues earlier, but now he learned their weaknesses after the first fight. And so he took him out with ease. So that's kind of the thing, So there you go. That's what it is. It's about learning and then getting better, and achieving the goal that you didn't achieve the first.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's as a writer, a creative person in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you've inspired them towards that path. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Try to break the mold of what you see that's been done before you that inspires you. Try to take that, learn from it, but then break it and do better. Because we're not getting it all right. So, look at the world around you, find out what it needs. It's going to need something different than what, I think my generation needs. And I think, art is intrinsically tied to how can we improve the world around us? How can we give it more beauty? How can we give it more freedom? How can we bring liberation? How can we do those through the art that we create? And those questions, and the answers to those questions are going to be different for a generation behind me. So do that. Again, so that's what I would say. Like, how can you look ahead at the generation that came before you and take what you like and be inspired, like you said, but then how can you break the mold of what has come before to be better, and to continue to bring beauty and liberation and those things to the world around you in terms of art creation. And you're going to have to be in tune with the world around you in some way. Thorn is very much me being inspired by Batman and Spider-Man comics through the years, very much. So if you've read the Zero issues up for free. I told this on a couple of podcasts. Read the Zero issue and then go read Detective Comics 27, the first appearance of Batman. And it's a direct homage piece or homage or whatever to that. But it's like me saying, okay, but this character is different in this way. So, like, here's what inspired the character, but here's why it's different and necessary for now. There's that, Spider-Man, right? His comics. You'll see this in a couple of issues of Thorn. Spider-Man is going through the city. He's got to go get to, Aunt May or whatever. He's got his thing that Peter's doing, or he's got his thing, that he's got to stop Doc Ock. I don't know. But the filler of Spider-Man comics is there's always somebody doing petty crime that he has to stop, whether it's a supervillain or just, regular Joe. He has to take the time as he's swinging across the city to stop them. Like that's his thing, right? And so Thorn, as he's moving across the city at different times, he has to stop and stop police nonsense. And whatever these police are doing right now, they shouldn't be doing to the citizens of the city and of his neighborhood. He needs to go and solve this crime, but he has to stop and deal with this police nonsense. And that's kind of part of and so it's me taking these things that inspired me as a comic book reader, and then doing something different for today. Yeah, that's all.
If your life was a comic book, what would its title be, and what would its soundtrack be?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm writing a comic book about my life, and it's called Mustard Seed. So let's just stick with that because I've already done it. I'm terrible at titles. I hate them. But eventually, if I work on a story long enough, they kind of work themselves out, and I find one I like. It just takes a lot longer. So I say I'm terrible. I just can't come up with them right away. But Mustard Seed, let's stick with that. Album, I don't know. I'm not a big album guy, but I really like The Human Condition by John Bellion. So I'm going to say that. That's the first thing that came to my mind. So that one.
Well, I do hate to say it, Travis, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Kurt, for having me. It's been a blast.
Before I let you go, where can we find you? How can we support you? And where can we find you online?
Okay. On Twitter and Instagram, Travis B. Hill 5. Instagram is more of me just kind of posting about comics and what I'm up to in comics. Twitter is where you get my comics plus my NBA thoughts, my theology thoughts, my political thoughts. So I can be a little bit more obnoxious on there. I'm sure I'm muted by plenty of people. So if you're just looking for comic updates, go to Instagram. But it's Travis B. Hill 5, both of those. TravisBHillComics.com. You can see a sample of my work. You can, like I said, the first issue of Mustard Seed, the Thorn Zero issue, as well as several other short stories if you want to see a sample of what I'm up to and what I've been up to. And then lastly, support me by, going out on July 5th to your local comic shop and picking up a copy of Thorn. If they don't have it, then figure out how to get it. That's all.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,000+ others on our website, tgtmedia.com, or twogeekstalking.com. That's the word TOW, not the number 2. That's a totally different website you don't want to go to. And our website's going through a revamp, so go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGTmedia. The podcast is back on your favorite podcast streaming service, Two Geeks Talking. Just search for that, and you'll find this and 1,000+ others on there as well, too. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.